the sound tracker, and recently I've had a bit of a tragedy in my AV setup where... Oh, you mean the fact the front's not lit? Can't accomplish much if the front's not lit, that's for sure. Well, yeah, but I was thinking more about the other issue. Oh, you mean the rapid red over here? No, the thing accompanying that. What more do you need? The front's not lit and it's flashing red. You might as well just assume there's another issue by proxy. Well, yes, but how would you know? Well, 'cause the front's not lit and a little flashy bulb implies the brokenness. It's something of a giveaway. Alright, well, what's the overarching issue then? Well, the front's not lit in this case, and flashing, and it's very unusual. Well, what about the sound? The sound? Yes, the sound. It's supposed to make noise. What, the front? No, the back of the front. The back of the front? Yes, the back of the front. Well, the back of the front's not lit either. It's not designed to be. Doesn't need to be either. It just needs to make sound. I think you're confused, mate. Your back, inside, and front not lit. Well, does it make sound or not? Well, of course not. Can't make sound if the front's not lit, can it? No way to choose where to get your sound from. Now we're getting somewhere. Why isn't it making sound? Ah, well, the power hit it. The power hit it? Yes, the power hit the back. That's not normal, though, is it? Well, all plugged in? Chances about 1 in a million, I suppose. Alright, so what can we do about the sound issue? Well, there's no sound at this point. Yes, but to get it from no sound to making sound. No, it's not making sound, alright? It's beyond sound. All there is a box and a surged power board with a flashing red beacon. And a blown protection circuit. And a sketch. And the part of the box at the front's not lit. Some of the front's not lit, and it's a shame, but this home theater amp was really just okay. Now, it's one that came in a box with a small set of speakers that was made more to just give surround sound as a function than to do anything meaningful with it. It had a bare bones setup and a weak Pro Logic effects library, but the thing that really got me over this amp actually was there's no tone controls whatsoever to speak of. Now, I must have spent hours going through settings on this thing, and it had no way of adjusting bass and treble, and for me, that's bare fucking minimum a necessity for an amplifier. Now, this amp did give me my first taste of surround sound, though, and I spent a lot of time watching old movies in surround for the first time, playing music in surround, and, playing different games that have surround soundtracks, and I became so enamored with it that, as cheap as it is, it was really well worth using it to see if surround sound was a good fit for me. And now that I've tried it, there's no going back to just stereo. The other amp being broken will also give me a good opportunity to go through surround sound as a whole, and see which era of surround will benefit my setup the best. Surround sound has had a lot of various updates over the years, and this amp is capable of decoding the very first incarnation of Dolby surround sound in the home theater. I've featured this amp in other videos mainly as a hi-fi amp because home theater receivers are great for hi-fi use. They've got more than enough inputs to hold down any setup and pack a good punch for stereo playback. I use home theater amps for hi-fi because you can essentially connect your whole stereo, your record player, your CD player, multiple tape players, even a few video players to the back of this thing, and you'll still get the best possible sound reproduction with the equipment you have, all in one place. That being said, I do feel this thing's capabilities are a little bit lackluster as far as using it for hi-fi goes. I don't know if it just needs new caps or if it always sounded this way, but it just doesn't bring the richness and brilliance to a hi-fi system that I've come to expect from testing out other amps. The one mode that I haven't tried yet, though, is Dolby Surround. Regardless of this thing having a lackluster performance as a hi-fi amp, I'm super curious about how the first incarnation of Dolby both feels in the room and how it operates overall. Now, there are a lot of different kinds of Dolby that have been manufactured over the years. I mean, it comes with the company having the name. But Dolby Surround for the home draws its inspirations both from Dolby's film surround sound work and from older hi-fi surround. Now, hi-fi circa the 1970s was evolving, shall we say. Stereo sound was a big deal for its ability to set moods and create interesting mixes by panning the audio from left to right, giving the album more texture and the listener a better experience. So if you have more speakers in a hi-fi, you'll be able to create a more ambient mix, and so there were a few different companies who were eager to bring surround sound to music. And from that came a few surround sound technologies, the important one in this case being matrix surround. In a normal hi-fi stereo setup, you have two tracks of audio being recorded, the left channel of information and the right channel of information. When the tape or record is played back, the left and right channels appear in their proper places in the left and right speakers. So with matrix surround for hi-fi, you have four channels of information. We have the front left, the front right, the rear right speaker, and the rear left speaker. Remember, more speakers means better ambience, which makes for a more lively sound. For hi-fi matrix surround, a matrix encoder is present during mastering. It takes the rear left and rear right channel of information and folds it into the front left and front right information, recording the audio on two channels like you would with conventional stereo. When you play matrix audio back through a decoder, it extrapolates the signals for the rear channels and places them where they need to be, giving you hi-fi matrix surround sound. Ideally with this setup, you'd have been able to create a better mix like this card shows. Brass and drums more prominent in the back, strings and piano in the front, more feeling in the mix and thus in the listener's room overall. For movies, matrix works a little differently. A real benefit of going to the theater back in the day was actually the surround sound capability. I mean, you could either watch a movie on your little TV at home with one mono speaker, maybe a stereo TV if you were lucky and had the money for it, or you could go to the theater and experience a movie on the big screen with fully detailed surround sound audio. Dolby Matrix Surround for the theaters was branded Dolby Stereo, so if you've ever watched a movie till the end and seen this logo, that's their mark for Theater Matrix Surround. And yes, the fact that it says stereo and actually means surround sound capable is confusing and obtuse, I know. Especially considering that their Matrix Surround for home theaters is called Dolby Surround. There's a lot to keep track of at this point, and the misleading names don't help. Encoding and decoding analog surround for a theater is a similar process to the hi-fi one. Start with 4 tracks of information, fold the matrix surround information onto the stereo optical tracks here on the film strip, and have a decoder present in the theater to bring back out those 4 tracks. Where it's different is the distribution of the sound. The real quantifying difference between hi-fi and movie surround is Dolby Stereo in theaters uses its 4 channels of information differently. It runs the left and right channels as you'd expect. Sound increases and decreases in the left and right speaker to give the illusion of movement from left to right. The third channel is embedded in the left and right tracks as a dual mono signal, which means that the sound waves that make up the center channel will always have the exact same wavelength and amplitude. It's these waves combined in the front left and right audio that create the center speaker information. Take this synthesizer section for example. Like this, it sounds like it's coming from the left. And like this, it sounds like it's coming from the right. And like this, it should sound more or less centered. The Dolby decoder listens for and extracts those signals in the left and right audio track that are the same wavelength and amplitude, then sends them to the center speaker because if a sound is playing at the same wavelength and amplitude in the front left and front right speaker, it will give the impression that whatever's making the sound is right in front of you. This also in the theater improves the audience's ability to hear dialogue and gives a greater illusion of sounds going from left to right. The fourth channel is the surround information, and this is also in dual mono. This is where Dolby is really clever about the audio encoding though. The surround sound audio wave is embedded in the left and right audio channel halfway or 90 degrees out of phase with itself. And to explain phasing in audio, take this basic sine wave for example. It's 2 mono soundtracks panned dead center between the left and right speaker, both of which are currently in phase. The basic explanation of being in phase is, this wave moves up, which means the speaker gains a positive charge and pushes the sound of the wave out through the voice coil. That's why speaker cones move back and forth, they're pushing sound waves out into the room. If both sine waves are fully 180 degrees out of phase like this, the pattern reverses and the speaker gains a negative charge. You'll still hear sound, but the voice coil will pull instead of pushing. The process happens in reverse, and this is why it's so important to check that your speakers are wired correctly. Wiring them backwards will make them come in out of phase. And speaking of which, what happens if I select just one wave and invert it so that it's out of phase with the other? The two waves cancel each other out, and that right there is how the surround sound channel is hidden. The surround sound information is recorded plus 90 degrees phase shifted in the left channel and minus 90 degrees phase shifted in the right channel. This is what allows Dolby to create the ambience effect channel, so essentially wind rustling, rain, birds chirping, explosions, anything that's supposedly happening behind the point of view of the camera, that's all ambient effects. When the surround channel is read from the left and right stereo tracks, it goes through the Dolby processor where it's flipped back into phase and then fed as a dual mono signal through an audio bandpass filter and a time delay. The audio bandpass filter strips off the high end and the low end of the soundtrack to ensure that sounds that aren't supposed to get through to the surround channel don't get through. Like dialogue, for example. It'd be a little bit distracting if somebody were speaking on screen and their voice ended up in the surround channel. Now, the time delay is there to take advantage of something called the Haas effect, which is a phenomenon in human hearing where one sound followed by another in a short frame of time are perceived as a single sound. So, in essence, the slight delay in audio to the rear speaker will give the illusion of movement around you. All of these things combined create the overall effect of surround sound. The center and surround channels are created from special ways of reading the main stereo track and divided between the front and the back of the theater to give a surround effect. That's all for the theater, though. Dolby Surround home receivers bring matrix surround for movies into the home, though this operates a little counterintuitively on the receiver. On the back of the receiver, you can see the speaker outputs. We have left and right for both the front and the back channels. But wait a second, if movie theater surround has left, right, center, and one surround channel, what's this doing? Well, with this being the first incarnation of Dolby Surround for the home, it processes surround, but it outputs it a little strangely. When the Dolby circuit is on, rather than it being left, center, right surround with 3 speakers in the front and 1 in the back for surround, this plays the left and right channels of audio through the front speakers, divides the third center channel into the front, left, and right speakers, and is feeding the 2 rear speakers a dual mono soundtrack. Yeah, so between the misleading names and the similar but different way of how everything operates, there's a lot of information to get confused over, and I had initially assumed that these were operating like old hi-fi surround, but nope! Hey. It's a lot to take in if you really want to use original Dolby surround, but in any case, even with the tech not functioning quite how I expected it to, it's still supposedly a very versatile surround sound processor. Dolby Matrix Surround is supposed to be forward compatible with its successors, so I can play Dolby Surround Pro Logic 1 and 2 encoded things on this receiver. This means that I can play quite a lot of things for movies and games. VHS, DVD, Laserdisc, Blu-ray, PS3, GameCube, Xbox, Wii, there's a ton of stuff that uses one of those 3 surround sound formats, and all of them are compatible with each other because they're all variants of Dolby Matrix Surround. I've attached up the front, left, and right speakers and the surrounds to the back of the amp. Next, connect up the RCA cables from my switch array over here. So, in my AV setup, all of my vintage video players and game systems run to switch boxes. I select what I want to listen to, and that feeds everything to these RCA cables. Any sound source, be it my VHS player, my Laserdisc player, a CD player, Super Nintendo, PS1, all of it will run through that one set of cables. That's okay though, because that's how Dolby works. It takes the stereo left and right signal and pulls the surround sound information out of it when the Dolby circuit is switched on. If Dolby stays switched off, I still get conventional stereo from the receiver because the left and right speaker signals are always present. With the 4 speakers connected and adjusted at the front and rear volumes here, and the rest of my AV gear attached, let's take a look at some movies, music, and games and compare stereo to surround. The easiest thing to try out first would be, how does the Dolby circuit respond to music? Well, let's pop in a CD and find out. I have a lot of music that I'd like to hear in this format, but I do also have a special CD that has a Dolby surround track on it, Tomida's Cosmos, so let's pop everything in and see what happens. Alright, let's see what happens. Oh my god! Oh, that's cool. Alright. In stereo, it's a great mix. I mean, all the sound is really nicely placed and well balanced, but when you enter into surround, all the stuff that's really well balanced in stereo becomes even more exponentially well balanced in surround. I mean, everything is absolutely jumping and well leveled, and you know, the sounds that you would want to be well leveled, like that little kind of fluttery thing like this. Yeah, that little kind of dancing thing with the high bits in the synthesizer. That's really, really well balanced between the front and the back, and you can hear it kind of shifting positions as it's going. That section takes the already established surround field and then starts playing around with it. I mean, it heightens things in the front and then in the back, and it envelops you. It's absolutely incredible. I love that. Oh my god, I gotta get more surround discs. That is unbelievably awesome. I mean, almost indescribably so. But I gotta find out what this thing can do to my stereo discs. Give me 1 sec to change that out. I'm gonna use one of my favorite songs off of Rush's Test for Echo for this next one, Half the World. Let's see how this goes. I'm very curious. Interesting and cool things about that. First of all, I think it's down to one of the effects of just how the album was mixed. This album is pretty loudly mixed and a little bit on the compressed side. So it sounds like that in stereo normally. And what the surround field seems to be doing with that information is spacing out all the stuff that is generally compressed. So it's interesting to hear because it still sounds compressed, but in a different kind of expanded sense, because I can hear all the stuff normally happening in front. I mean, Neil's drums are in front, Geddy's bass and vocals are kind of in front, but Alex's guitar is absolutely surrounding the place. I mean, the guitar work is all over. It's enveloping the room, and it sounds more like it's coming from the back than it is from the front, which is really cool in my opinion, because it gives the front a little bit more space. Sorta. It still sounds compressed, but it's an expanded kind of compressed where, because it's being processed through the surround field, I can hear more of what's going on. And that's up to and including a lot of the little bits that Alex did on what I think was a lute. Alex, what instrument did you play on that? Well, according to the front of the album cover, it's mandolin. Good choice. Interesting instrument to put on that. But the point is, you can hear a lot more just spatial awareness between all of those things, and there was one note that I had never heard before, and it just kind of came in and sung throughout the entire thing, and that was right at this point. Hold on a minute! One note just rang out and soared through the entire soundscape, and it was beautiful. Finding out that you can hear things in the mix that you never would have thought you'd have heard before just because you changed how you were listening to it is fantastic to me, and I want to hear more. Up next, we've got Genesis, We Can't Dance. Incredible, but for different reasons, because what I'm hearing in what I presume is a quieter mix, because this is an old CD, is that with the mode set to surround, it has a great spatial awareness of where the guitars are at first, and it's playing around with Phil Collins's drums. All the percussion is bleeding from the front and into the back, depending on the effect that's being used, like this sound effect here. Yeah, that kind of boinging sound, that's going from front to back immediately in kind of a wavering fashion. It's beautiful. And all of the kind of like sighing and breathing that the drum kit is also doing, like this sound. That's also just kind of spaced between the front and the back, and it's incredible to be in the center of that. The mix gets even better than that though, because once the guitar starts fading down when the organ kicks in, that sound, as it rises up, the guitars kind of fade back in between front and back, and then the dominance of the organ just comes from the front. And it sounds so good! Vocals included. The vocals are actually spaced well this time, so I think my hunch was correct. It's down to the mix of the album that you're listening to. The one thing that I haven't tried out yet is a live album, so I'm going to be doing Led Zeppelin's Celebration Day, because I like it. So, let's see what happens. Just a quick one on that, because it's about what I expected and up to the expectation that I had for it. Because it's a live album, it's another one of those like compressed about as hard as Test for Echo was, but it's interesting in that it does the same kind of expansion that it did with Test for Echo, where it expands the sound field but kind of maintains that weird compressed atmosphere of this album. But what was cool about it was you could hear crowd noise in the background, and it set it up pretty well so that it was echoing the front music towards the back, which I didn't think this was going to be able to discern the difference. Because so far it's done well with stereo mixes, being able to like pan sounds and shoot them all over the place, but I thought it was going to do the same with like echoes and crowd effects, but it's doing a pretty good job giving some spatial awareness to the fact that this is a concert recorded disc. And I wasn't expecting that, but it's pretty incredible. Whether it's down to the technology or to the engineer who put it together, or a combination of both and one knowing how to use the other really well, I don't know, but I liked hearing all of these things in stereo processed through the surround field, because the surround field gives it a greater sense of presence in the room, and I really like that. I wouldn't be able to finish the music section in good conscience without doing a record as well, so let's do something a little bit off the wall and try out a quadraphonic record. This is an SQ record. It's an old Matrix surround album, and I've never tried this. I'm not really expecting it to work correctly, but I really want to see what'll happen. I've got the Rick Wakeman album on the record player, and I just read the sleeve. I had not done this before. Quadraphonic. Note, this A&M record has been encoded for true compatible quadraphonic playback. The original multi-channel tapes were mixed and mastered to reproduce the finest possible quadraphonic sound when played back through a matrix decoding device. This record is pressed on an anti-static vinyl developed for A&M Records to ensure low surface noise, reduced record wear, and prolonged record life. A rigid quality control standard has been maintained in all phases of manufacturing to ensure its faithful sound reproduction. It can also be played on conventional stereophonic equipment with excellent results. Given all that I just read on here, I'm raising my standards a little bit, because while I know I'm definitely using the wrong kind of decoder, I've also heard that Dolby is supposed to do well with older quadraphonics. Now, whether or not that's a newer version of Dolby and not this first edition Dolby, shall we say, I don't know, but I think it'll be able to pull it off. Let's find out. No. You kidding me? cutting it early because I've absolutely heard enough. That... I guess valiant first attempt, that's somehow even less than I was expecting. I mean, I've heard stuff to the effect of that early quadraphonic music just doesn't sound good off of an LP, especially if it's in matrix form. And granted, I know I'm using the wrong kind of decoder for this, but I was still expecting a bit more, because it says it's compatible with stereo. I shut off the Dolby processor for a little bit of it, and it still sounds like half of the mix is missing. Like, that's the only way to describe it, is like half of the mix, the bottom end is definitely not there. There's little to no bass in any of it. Anything that's treble is poorly placed in the matrix field, and while there are some like nice little kind of glances in different directions, it just, because so much of the rest of the mix is definitely missing, it doesn't sound good, and it's very definitely not as good as a stereo copy, because I'm sure if I were to use a stereo copy through the Dolby processor, which unfortunately I don't have, despite that being one of my favorite albums, I feel like a stereo copy would have fared better through the Dolby processor, because that just didn't sound appropriate. Maybe it's down to the fact that I'm using the wrong kind of decoder for it. It requires an actual matrix decoder rather than me screwing around with Dolby circuitry. But it just, I expected more. Anyway, so disappointing first use of a quadraphonic album, but if it is down to me using the wrong decoder, I guess I'll try and find an SQ decoder to go with it, because not a good result from the Dolby one. I mean, granted, I was doing it for fun, but I mean, I expected better based on how everything else had been going up till this point, you know?
Let's try out a VHS tape, and yeah, fun fact, some VHS tapes have Dolby surround encoding as a part of their hi-fi functionality. So this logo on a VHS means that there's a lot of options for expansion.
He goes, honey, there's nothing to fear here. That's what scares me.
Cool. VHS performs immaculately well, and I don't know why I'm so surprised about that, because I mean, everything else that I've heard so far that the surround processor can do really made a lot of emphasis on it being surround, of course, but the music in the film is absolutely just as well crafted. It immerses you in the whole tone of the situation as the score does, but the sound effects are also really, really well placed. I mean, every single time there's an action shot of something going on, you can feel exactly what's happening just by the motion of the sound effect. I mean, it's incredible exactly how precise everything is, and to get it to that degree, it must have taken hours in the editing room just for one scene, because the amount of like angle changes that the camera goes through, you have to change sound parameters for whatever you're doing, because, you know, it's a different shot, and different shots having different sound effects is kind of the whole theme of filmmaking, I guess. But sideways ramble to that, but it's just, everything is so well placed down to from the arrows shooting across at Indy, like in that scene. You can feel the arrows flying across. It's amazing. And aside from that, the boulder coming down, the whole rumbling feeling that it brings inside of the surround field, you can feel that it's just like inches away from him at any given point, and like, is it gonna crush him? Is it gonna crush him? Star Wars is the perfect film to test this out with. I mean, you can feel the immersion of being in space and flying. I mean, I know in space there's no sound or whatever, but the sound effects that are put in make you really feel like you're in the cockpit with them, or that you can feel the laser blasts happening around you. And when sound effects like that change direction, like a laser blast flying overhead, like what happened here, it gives a whole different energy and charge to the movie, because the amount of sound flying around you, and you sitting in the middle with a beautiful score by John Williams, and just immaculately done sound effects mixed to what sounds like absolute perfection. It's a whole new experience from the same film! I mentioned before that ProLogic 2 should be backwards compatible with Dolby Surround, so let's find out how true that is with the GameCube's best first-person shooter, Metroid Prime. For movies and music, detection of Dolby Surround will usually happen automatically, very much depending on your setup. But for game systems, however, surround sound usually has to be set up before it can be used. So let's go over that real quick. GameCube outputs stereo normally over an RCA cable, so in its main menu, select this option.
Oh yeah.
Where it gets a little funky is that the surround sound capability will be based on the software, so in each game you play, you have to go into the sound settings and select Dolby Surround. Alright, so what is immediately cool about that is that GameCube handles the Dolby processing surprisingly well. I mean, I don't think I should be surprised. It's Nintendo, they put a lot of care into the games that they make. But the way that the GameCube decides where in space things are is really emphasized by the processor. I mean, I guess it all is dependent on Samus's position there, and like maybe I guess things depending on where Samus is facing, it'll base sounds off of that. But it's incredible that the software is capable of distinguishing those kinds of things and then outputting it in real time through the processor. Like some of the explosions that were happening. There was one point where I did a kind of a circle to see if the surround sound processor could keep track of where the sound was coming from, and it did. It did it surprisingly well. I mean, the sound shifted with Samus's vision points, and beyond that, the overall atmosphere of the game is emphasized in the same way that Star Wars was. It brings forth like a whole new level of sonic detail just by virtue of having the surround sound processor on. Sounds that I didn't know existed are in this game, and it brings another level of immersion to it the same way that the movies did, and that the rest of the music that I tried out did. And along with that, you also have things like when you're shooting a missile at one of the pirates. I mean, you can hear the missile leaving the gun, spatially going towards the pirate, and then that kind of generalized explosion in that area when it's happening, and that the software can keep track of all those things happening and output it that way in the surround processor so that it gives the kind of sonic detail that I was hoping for is marvelous for me. And I'm pretty sure that in the same way that I have a whole bunch of movies that I have to rewatch now, I have a whole lot of games that I also have to replay in surround mode, because that whole set of detail that I just had in that one little mini-boss fight was absolutely incredible. I've tried a fair amount of things, but there's one sound I am dying to hear in surround, and I really hope this device can pull it off. Cool. So, with my having demonstrated all of that, you might also be wondering if Dolby works on VHS, Betamax, Laserdisc, DVD, video games of the 90s and 2000s, then why did all of those formats work on my mono or stereo TV without issues? Well, that's kind of part of the genius of their matrix processing. Dolby had compatibility in mind when they were making this format. If you had a mono TV set, you'd hook it up with either the RF cable or one of the left or right RCA audio cables for mono sound. If the audio track is formatted with Dolby Surround and playing from it, then it would push dialogue out as a priority. Remember, the dual mono center channel was split across the stereo tracks, so in mono sets you'd be able to hear what was being said clear enough.
Dr. Lass! Is my hand right? Keep my health in it! The ball came back! It's his hand!
If you have a stereo TV set, you have the benefit of stereo sound, the left and right tracks being read as they should, better dialogue emphasis from the dual mono encoding, and extra little effects from the just out of phase enough surround channel.
I've got it!
Tell us to take up the slack gently!
If you have surround sound, you reap all of the benefits, and this surround sound processor works great. It brings all of the ambience that I expected to a surround sound system, and it really amplified my experience overall that I've had with movies, music, and games. But that being said, as I said before, its performance is still a little bit lackluster sonically speaking. And besides, it's still limited to just Dolby Surround, so this means that I can only ever use 4 speakers with no center channel and no subwoofer. I also have no way of getting a digital input to the receiver, and it doesn't have the ability to decode DTS digital, which is another form of surround sound entirely. So I am in absolute awe of the technology, and I'm grateful that I was able to experience it, but as much as I've enjoyed using this amp over the years, I think it's time to upgrade. Anyway, thanks for watching, and if you like this video, you know what to do.